Hello, my name is Olurutimi Osha. Today, I want to talk about something that's been making the rounds on the internet, and that's with respect to the PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, or doctoral degrees, which people have or do not have. Uh, of course, it's I was inspired to do this for a number of reasons. One, there's the virtue signaling and angst that's a gog on the internet right now because of the falsification of misrepresentation um, of credentials by one doctor, apparent alleged misrepresentation of credentials by one Dr. Cheyenne Bryant. I think she's a black woman. So I saw it on my friend's Facebook timeline. And this friend of mine is really brilliant. She had a PhD, was a professor before she went to law school. We went law school together. And so she did a lot of studying. And, blacks feel that apparently many blacks think that, well, when one black person does wrong, it automatically makes the whole community of black people, targets. And so I'm seeing many black people bringing out their credentials that know that they haven't falsified their credentials. Uh, and of course, this Dr. Cheyenne Bryant, she's supposed to have had, some PhD through some online a defunct online university. Turns out, people are saying that she never got this PhD. First of all, I also have something against for-profit online universities. I think, you can use them for personal learning, but there shouldn't be any sort of imprimatur or imprimatur, right, of mark of distinction for a job, right? Because you're basically buying those degrees online, right? That's all you're really doing, right? It doesn't meet the standards, the sort of rigor as a brick and mortar school provides. That's that. Then the other thing is she's not the only one. Prior to her, there was the case of what has been found out as someone who was an illegal immigrant, Ian Roberts, who had been posing off uh, as a U.S. citizen when he wasn't, and he was actually working as superintendent of public schools. I think it was it Iowa, and making over $280,000. He wasn't even a U.S. citizen, and he didn't have his education, the degrees, the credentials he claimed to have. He claimed to have a PhD. He always refers to himself as Dr. Roberts, even till today. And in Roberts, it turns out that all of that was misrepresentation. It was fraud. You see that he graduated from, claimed to have gone to MIT, MBA, all these things. With my school, George Washington University, it turned out that all of it was fraudulent. He had one or two degrees, a bachelor's, master's, but not from impressive schools, right? And he puts these very impressive schools out there. It turns out that they have no records of him. He didn't graduate. He doesn't have a PhD, and so there's a lot of that going on. But something I wanted to turn to was the issue of the JD, the doctor in the JD, and people ask that is a JD, which is awarded in American law schools. I have a JD. JD means Juris Doctor Latin, or Doctor of Jurisprudence. That means Doctor of Law. And people ask that, does that really mean it's a doctorate degree? Of yes, it's a doctor, right? And so I'm going to explain the origins, what Doctor of Jurisprudence means, and then people want to misrepresent it and say, oh, that means you have a PhD. It's not a PhD, right? The JD is different from a PhD. People don't realize that PhD means Doctor of Philosophy. So I'm going to give the origins, and it will enlighten us further. So PhD means Doctor of Philosophy. The PH means philosophy, right? Doctor. My older brother, one of my brothers has a doctor of philosophy. In philosophy, he has a PhD. So the doctor of philosophy is normally awarded in the humanities or the sciences, and it's the doctor of philosophy has come to be standardized as a research doctorate. Now the JD is a professional doctorate, not a research doctorate. And people want to know, oh, should they refer to me as doctor? Should they refer to people who have a JD as a doctor? Uh, it would not be incorrect, right, to call them doctor. And I'll give the origin, but our field, the field of lawyers in America, right, they decided as a matter of professional courtesy, and to be appropriate, to be proper with respect to the layman who doesn't know, that we wouldn't use doctor. We just wouldn't call ourselves doctor, even though we have a Juris doctor. Um, and so it would be gauche that it's not incorrect because you have a doctorate. That's the reason why it's called doctor. That means you've earned, that title, Juris Doctor, Doctor of Law. But it will be gauche for us, right, who are in the community of lawyers who've earned a JD to call ourselves doctor, right? Because we don't want to be misrepresented as medical doctors, as physicians, right? Because the American common man, the ordinary person in America, understands a doctor to be a medical doctor, a healer. And we don't want to be misrepresented as that. By the way, we believe we have what we aspire, if we want some kind of professional courtesy, we have what it is that we want to be regarded as, and that's Esquire. So Esquire, we know it's only used for us, for lawyers, right? Doctor, the professional. By the way, the lawyer, the legal profession, the lawyers, they like elitist, they're elitist, right? The lawyers are probably the most elitist profession, maybe apart from medical doctors, right? But lawyers are very elitist, right? Um, so they say, well, everybody uses doctor, right? But Esquire, if you say Esquire, we know that you're referring to a lawyer. By the way, Esquire is an English term that was it was applied to gentlemen who were above commoners, but not members of the aristocratic society in England, right? So it was a term used to for gentlemen, and especially applied, lawyers in the rising merchant class, right, that had money, that weren't as aristocrats, but they had status, were referred to as esquire, right, gentlemen in England. So that in America, when they say esquire, um, it's known that you're referring to a practicing attorney, a lawyer, right? A practicing attorney, especially, they're the ones who use it. Those who have passed the bar, who are officers of the bar, use Esquire. Actually, anyone who's earned a JD in America is entitled to Esquire. But as a matter of practice, what we've been doing is it's those who've been called to the bar that use that Esquire, right, as a designation, Esquire. And so we feel that it's more prestigious to say Esquire than to call us doctor. If you teach, right, and I'm going to get to where I'm going. If you teach the law, then we won't call you doctor. We'll call you professor. In America, um, a teacher in the university is called a professor. In other countries, no, you're not. A professor is someone who's earned the highest level of teaching, right, in a university. So in Nigeria, for instance, if you start teaching, you're called a lecturer, not a professor, right? A professor is the highest title. But in Nigeria, in America, if you're teaching even your first year, if you're even, they just call you a professor, right? So you have to understand the nation, the nation or the when we say jurisdiction, we're referring to something that has a legal status. But the environment, so that's what I want to say, the vicinity, the environment in which you're using terms. And it'll become clear when I explain the origins of these words. So, um, the reason why lawyers in America, why we decided we're not going to use that term doctor, right? Even though it won't be incorrect, right? It's because one, it will be gauche, but importantly, we don't want lay people to confuse us with medical doctors. Now, doctor does not actually necessarily mean medical doctor, the physician. Over time, it's been misused, and the common man understands when you use doctor you're referring to a physician, a medical doctor. Uh, if someone said they graduated with a doctor of education degree, would you call them doctor? Yes, you'd call them doctor, right? There are people who go and get the doctor of education degree because they want to be called doctor, even after they had the JD. They got the Juris Doctor, but nobody refers to them as doctor. So they now go and get a doctor of education degree so they could refer to them as a doctor. It's a doctor of education degree is also a professional doctorate, practitioner's doctorate, just the way a Juris Doctor degree is. So a Juris Doctor is a professional doctorate. It's a professional doctorate. It is a practitioner's doctorate. The PhD is considered a research doctorate, right? A research doctorate. The PhD first came about and was first used for the humanities, the liberal arts, right? And I'll get to and because it required a dissertation, an original research dissertation in the liberal arts and the humanities. This started in Germany in the 19th century, right? And I'll explain the origin of words of those terms, doctor, and how they evolved. So let me start with the definition of the words. So doctor is actually from Latin. It's from Latin. It means the Latin is uh, docere, docere, right? Docere, doctor, docere. Docere means teacher, instructor, learned, right? A learned person. Teacher, instructor, learned person, and expert. Teacher, that's what docere means. You see, it has nothing to do with a healer, right? Docere, that's a teacher, learned, expert. That's what it means. Docere. The term for physician, right? Medical doctor that we mean. So you see, sometimes we say a medical doctor or physician, right? A doctor or physician. Physician is from French. It's from French. Physicien came into from Old French, came into English, Old English, Middle English. Physicien, physician, physician. It means healer, healer, physicien, physician. It means healer. It came from French, physicien, healer, for physician, right? That it got into French from Latin, right? Physicus, physicus, right? Natural philosopher. That's what it meant in Latin, natural philosopher. So prior to them being called medical doctors, the early medical healers, they were called natural philosophers. In the middle, in fact, at the beginning of America as well, the beginning, the 17th century, they were called natural philosophers. So physicus in Latin meant natural philosopher, right? That was what was the term of for medical doctor back then, physician. They were natural philosophers because they were dealing with nature, right? Healing arts. And uh, that comes from Greek. It had Greek roots in physicos, pertaining to nature, that which pertains to nature. Physicos, that's from Greek, right? So that's physician. So physician is actually the term for a what we know as medical doctor. So you see the medical, right? That's from medicus. Medicus, the Latin is medicus. Medicus means healer. And then the doctor part again, that's from docere, the Latin, an expert, a teacher, an expert learned in the healing arts, medical doctor. So you see in America, when they award the medical doctor's degree, it's a doctor of medicine or MD. You see, when you go to medical school and you graduate in America, you're awarded an MD, medical doctor. That's what it means, or DM, right? So again, so doctor, the doctor just means docere, an expert, learned person, uh, medicus in the healing arts, right? Medicus is what's heal. It's a healer, medicus healer. Um, over time, over time, it was in the 17th to the 19th century that, so they were known as physicians, right, or natural philosophers. They came to use that word doctor in the 17th to 19th century as a term of courtesy and prestige because of what doctors, because of what physicians do. They started calling them doctors, right? Doctor, but that's because the title doctor has the prestige. It still has the prestige today. So they call them doctors. Now, if you notice, so even if you're in England, in America, to become a medical doctor, you actually go to medical school, and the degree that you're awarded is an MD. So it has doctor in it, doctor of medicine, right? Doctor of medicine just means expert in medicine, right? Teacher of medicine, right? That's what doctor means. Doctor is not what means healer, right? So you notice in England, for instance, in England, when you graduate with you go to medical school, the same as in Nigeria. In England, medical school, you get an MBBS. MBBS, that's Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Science, right? Bachelor of Medicine, sorry, Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. The same thing in Nigeria. Nigeria takes about 7 years for you to get it. MBBS, Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. But when you graduate, they call you a doctor, even though your degree wasn't an MD. Because remember, the idea, the origin of using docere, doctor, was that you're learned, right? You've become an expert, right? So even though you went to school, the degree they award you in England, in the United Kingdom, when you go to medical school is MBBS, bachelor, two bachelor's degrees, right? Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. They still refer to you as doctor because you're learned, you're an expert in medicine, right? So they still call you a doctor, right? And by the way, in England, even though your first degree in law as well is a bachelor's, right? Is a bachelor's LLB, Bachelor of Laws. You're called there's a normative appellative, that's appellation that's used for lawyers in England, in the English speaking world, right? For lawyers, learned, right? You're a learned lawyer, a learned colleague, you're a learned person. Remember, learned doctor, right? That's what it means, doctor. So America was the first country in the English speaking world where we decided that, and this was in the 20th century, where we decided we're going to start using the JD, the Juris Doctor, that we're learned, that just call us doctor, we're experts, we're teachers. So we award the Juris Doctor, right? That we're learned, So, and we'll understand. So I've given the etymology, the origin of these words. Let me go and start with the first time, discuss the first time that um, the a doctoral degree was awarded. So the first doctoral degrees were awarded um, in Italy, University of Bologna, in the 12th century. University of Bologna still exists, and also in Paris, University of Paris. But in the 12th century, they're the first to award doctoral degrees. They awarded the doctoral degrees as a practitioner, right, for practitioner courses, because the higher faculties, the highest faculties, it was understood that they required doctoral level degrees to be able to practice, right? So they were practitioners' degrees, they were not for research, because just to be able to practice, you had to be a learner. You had learned enough to be a teacher yourself, right? Not just be a pupil who's graduated from a teacher. You've become an expert, you could teach yourself. So they were in those higher faculties. The higher faculties, these were what they were called: theology, law, and medicine. Those three things. So you can see why in America, universities decided in the 20th century that the entry level to be able to practice as a lawyer, you'd have to get a doctor of law, a Juris Doctor. So it's a practitioner's doctorate, right? So that was the first time in 12th century in the University of Bologna. That was when the doctoral degrees were awarded. And for those, for theology, law, and medicine, that just to be able to practice, to be able to start off in the profession, you needed a level of expertise. You would have trained up to a level of expertise, very deep learning, right? Very deep. That even you'd become an expert so that you could actually teach. You were a teacher. You studied it so much that you reached the level of being a teacher. So in theology, law, and medicine, right? And you see, that's how it is today. So the medical doctor when you go when you go to medical school and you graduate after your 4 years, you're not getting a PhD in medicine. You're getting a practitioner's doctorate. That's doctor of medicine, right? Medicus is what's the healer. Doctor, that means you're an expert. The same thing with law school. You finish from law school in America, do your 3 years, you're awarded a doctor of law, Juris doctor, doctor of law, right? To be a practitioner, right? So it's a practitioner's doctorate. It's a professional doctorate. Because they said the idea is that these fields are so deep. They need a deeper understanding, a certain level of expertise to be able to practice, to be able to enter the profession. Now, so over time, so, and by the way, back then there was civil law, there was canon law, right? Canon law, that was for the church, right? Canon law was for the church. The origin of our laws, apart from the kings, the dictators, by the medieval dark ages and all that stuff, came from the church, right? Our laws, in European laws, that is, came from the church, right? So you see, law and theology, they were very close. So the law was broken into two: civil law, and then there was canon law. Now, over time, um, there came, so that was the beginning of the universities. It's universities that award doctorates, right? Over time, there came to be the liberal arts. The liberal arts. The liberal arts were lower. They were not as demanding as these higher faculties of theology, law, and medicine. So over time, the liberal arts, they awarded master's degree, right? And masters, although they viewed them in the Middle Ages as equivalent to doctor, because you could be a teacher. Masters was all you required to teach at the liberal arts level, right? To have the humanities, liberal arts, humanities, and other sciences, right? It was the Germans in the 19th century who now developed. They were the first to develop the Doctor of Philosophy as original research degree, right? The Germans were the ones who introduced the Doctor of Philosophy it was started off for the humanities, because again, remember, the humanities, the liberal arts, the sciences, they didn't require a level of expertise as law, medicine, uh, and and theology required just to get in, just to start off. They didn't require that. So over time, so those people were feeling left out, right? So the Germans came up with the Doctor of Philosophy, that okay, that these fields in the humanities and sciences that didn't require the level of expertise for entry. Well, if you learned and learned and learned up to a certain stage at the university, right, you could study up to a doctor of philosophy. So you produce original research, then you could be called a doctor. So that's the research doctorate. So that's how the research doctorate came about, the doctor of philosophy, right? A research doctorate. So the research doctorate up to this day is understood as having a research component. You're producing a dissertation to graduate that you have to defend, in which you're producing original research. And normally you're doing that because you want to teach at the university level. You're going to teach, right? So that's why, again, a doctor, docere, it means teacher. You're an expert teacher, learned person. You're a teacher, right? So you study up and produce the research, and you can teach at the university. So that's the distinction, right? You're not a practitioner of your field, but the other fields where they use Juris Doctor, they're practitioners' doctorates, professional doctorates, like we have in the JD, Juris Doctor. So it is a doctorate, but the objective is different, right? So, but a reason why we don't refer to ourselves as doctor, it's gauche, right? For lawyers, right? If somebody got a doctor of education, like I said, it's not a research D.Ed, doctor of education D.Ed. It's not a research doctorate. It's a professional doctorate. But they refer to those people as doctors, right? So it wouldn't be incorrect to refer to someone who has a Juris Doctor as doctor, but it's gauche for our profession. We don't want it because we're lawyers. Lawyers think, in America, lawyers think that they're distinct, they're special. Don't call us doctor, right? If we want to teach, and that's the only requirement, by the way, that's a requirement. A JD is a requirement to teach law in universities. So you see our professors, they have a JD. You might find the rare cases where some of my professors had a PhD, several. The person who taught me criminal law had a PhD from Yale, but he had a PhD before he went to law school. So there are many people like that. I had a professor who had an MD JD. He was a medical doctor. He got his medical degree before he went to law school, right? Um, I had actually intended on doing that. That's why I went on to do biological science. I was a pre-med at Columbia. I was intending to go to med school before I went to law school, right? Um, but I didn't do that. I didn't go to med school. So I have a bachelor's, I have an MBA, I have a JD, right? I have several degrees, at least four. Um, so there were several people, like I said. I had a professor who taught me tax, who had a PhD from Harvard in economics. Later on, he went to get a JD because he wanted to be a lawyer, right? And like I said, there was a friend of mine, colleague of mine from law school. She was a professor of chemistry. She had a PhD in chemistry. But later, she went back to law school to get her JD, right? So, you know, but you don't have a PhD requirement in law. All you need is the JD to teach law at a university as a law school in America, a JD, Doctor of Law, because you can teach. Doctor means teacher. So that's it. That's a distinction between a research doctorate and a professional doctorate. They're both doctors, right? If you want to, in terms of, what is it that you're, if you can call them a doctor or not. But lawyers, again, in America, they don't want to be called, it's gauche to call them doctor, even though they have a JD. And also the reason is also because another reason that it makes sense is in other nations, right? In other nations, uh, lawyers, the entry level of law is a bachelor's. In Nigeria, you do 5 years of law school. Yeah, it's 5 years studying law at to get a bachelor's from a university. You're awarded an LLB, a bachelor's degree, LLB, and then you do 1 year at a in Nigerian law school, right? That's a vocational, the practical aspect, and pass your exams. The practical aspect, that's 6 years. And you're awarded an LLB, BL, right? So bachelor's. So those people don't call themselves doctor, right? So it would be bizarre that, okay, in America, people who get their first law degree are calling themselves doctor, but other people, foreign people, are not. Of course, that's the case for medical doctors, but it's sort of a professional courtesy for medical doctors. In Nigeria, like I said, and in England, uh, they're not awarded a doctor of medicine. They awarded an MBBS, right? Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, but they call them doctor as well. Even though over time we've just come to use the word doctor as synonymous with physician, right? With healer. But doctor doesn't mean healer. Doctor means teacher, expert, learned person, right? That's what it means. Teacher, instructor, learned person. That's what doctor means. Docere from Latin. The healer is in medicus. The healer is in physician, physician from French, right? So words very important. Many people don't know. Hopefully, this explains things, right? PhD just means Doctor of Philosophy. It was first applied to the liberal arts, the humanities, right? Because they didn't require as high a level of education as theology, law, and medicine already required. Those were the first fields that, required that were awarded doctoral degrees just to be practitioners, right? They're practitioner doctorate. So the liberal arts were felt left out. They sort of left out because they weren't as rigorous. Liberal arts, science, they were not as rigorous as those three higher faculties. That's what they were called. And so that's where the Doctor of Philosophy came up, right? As having a research component that required, original research component that required a dissertation. So importantly, there are two types of doctorates: a practitioner's doctorate or professional doctorate. That's like Doctor of Education, D.Ed, Doctor of Law, Doctor of Medicine. That's a practitioner doctorate. You can call them doctorates. It's a doctorate. And then there's PhD. The PH means philosophy, Doctor of Philosophy. That's a research doctorate, right? Somebody who wants to go and teach at a university. Those people can also teach. That's a requirement for them to teach. But they also set up shop outside, right? As attorneys, medical doctors, physicians, they have a medical practice and things like that. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.